The Geopolitics and Empire podcast is joined by my fellow Mexican and American, Ed Calderon, who has worked in the fields of counter-narcotics, organized crime investigation, and public safety in the northern border region of Mexico. During this period, he coordinated and worked executive protection details for high-level government officials and visiting dignitaries, often in some of the most dangerous parts of the country. He's well known from some of his online appearances on programs such as the Joe Rogan podcast, Timcast, and elsewhere. Gracias por acompañarme, Ed. How is life?
Gracias por la invitación, hermano. Good, road life, living like a hobo, basically. Kind of traveling from town to town right now, but everything good.
It's an interesting life as well to have a nomadic lifestyle. Since the audience is international, there's still a good portion of people who don't know much about Mexico or Ed Calderon or haven't seen your viral interviews online. It would be great if you could give us perhaps a quick bio on where you came from, your work, and your interests.
Sure. Grew up in Tijuana, Mexico, the most the most traversed border on the planet, basically. Skateboarded when I was a kid, was into punk rock, very counterculture against authority. And tried to go to medical school, and then that didn't work out. So I joined a paramilitary experimental police force that they came out with back in the early 2000s in Mexico. Basically just jumped into the fray of the drug war as it was just kind of starting. Did about 12 years of work within some of the operations group that worked along that northern border region. Worked with the military, worked with state and local and federal law enforcement agencies in different capacities. Did a few high-level dignitary protection work as well, and so basically got to see it all ground level. From the start of the drug war to some of the legendary shootouts in Tijuana, and I was there for a lot of it and survived it somehow. And more importantly, I kept myself clean. Never took anything that wasn't mine. Never got in anybody's pocket, which was it's not an easy thing to do in that environment. And towards the end of my career, it just became unsustainable. So I had to leave. After that, I went to the United States to look for the American dream, with nothing, but a few $1,000s in my pocket and nothing else. And I was graciously accepted into to a small community of military community in California, and been doing classes, training, consulting for federal government SF units across the world, and just training civilians in how to be safe and prepared for bad situations ever since. Aside from the advocacy that I do for some marginalized communities and kind of bringing attention to some of their stories, specifically related to immigration and things along the border and cartels.
A message from our sponsors. The Nomos app will help you survive COVID-1984 and the Great Reset. Nomos is a time bank that can be used by communities anywhere in the world. You just need to talk people into using it. For example, if you go to your barber for a 30-minute haircut, your barber receives 30 minutes in his time bank. He can then use that time to pay for an appointment with the doctor. I've spoken to the developer who is passionate about creating solutions for surviving and thriving in the apocalypse. Nomos is available in both English and Spanish. Hurry and visit nomos.net before they roll out the cashless society and put you in the algorithm ghetto. Also, if you need health insurance that covers you wherever you may roam, check out my friend James Guzman's Borderless Health Insurance. One of the great things about living internationally is saving money on health care, but private care overseas can be expensive. Go to borderlesshealthinsurance.com to watch a short presentation on expat and digital nomad healthcare and sign up for a free consultation to review your options. Geopolitics and Empire needs funding. You can leave a donation, book a consultation, or become a member, which gets you access to my brief weekly commentary, a monthly newsletter of my thoughts, a private telegram, a monthly members group call, and my second premium broadcast called Dissident Thinker, where I conduct interviews and provide solo analysis. Dissident Thinker is also available on Rockfin and for supporters on Locals. Yeah, I left the America for the Mexican dream, so we reversed roles here. So a lot of people want to really understand the drug war and narco situation in Mexico. It's confusing. I think a few years ago, I spoke to Mexican academic Osvaldo Zavala, who wrote a book on this. So, we have the power structure of the narcos, their links to the Mexican and, possibly American governments, as well as, how dangerous the situation really is for ordinary folks in Mexico, as well as the U.S. I mean, even for people living in Mexico, like myself, Mexicans, naturalized Mexican that I am, like myself, it's still not clear. Crime and death is going on all around the country, all around us. Yet for many Mexicans, we don't directly come across it. So it's really hard to gauge how bad the situation is. So maybe if you can give us like a crash course 101 and, what's the power structure? What's going on with the drug war and the governments and all of that?
I mean, I guess we have to go back to the 50s and 60s. Mexico is a strategic country. It's strategic because it is next to, the superpower, or at least the one of the superpowers that has been influencing things at a global scale for the past almost 100 years. That is both a blessing and a curse for a lot of Mexicans. We have the saying in Mexico, México tan lejos de Dios y tan cerca de Estados Unidos. Mexico far from God, but close to the United States. Interventionism didn't stop with the last Mexican-American war as far as United States interfering in Mexico. If you go back to the mass shooting of students during the communist uprising in the 60s in Tlatelolco in Mexico City, you will find out that the president of Mexico was a CIA asset paid by the U.S. government. And that some of the stuff that happened that day was probably orchestrated and or at least pushed by American interest that didn't want to see a communist revolution happen across the border. Now, this is just an example of one of the situations that happened where, American interventionism in the in Mexico has led to a change of policy and a change of direction for the country of Mexico. Now, Mexico is not without fault. We have had horrible government for years, and corruption is systemic at a cultural level throughout the country. So that's also a factor that can't be ignored. And finally, I mean, the United States. It's becoming clearer and clearer that during the 70s and 80s, the United States was utilizing Mexico as a front to pay for certain operations going on overseas for them. The whole situation with Kiki Camarena and all the information that's come to light about that. Everybody was assumed that the cartels killed the DEA agent Kiki Camarena. It turns out that he was probably ordered assassinated by members of the U.S. government at some point during the past. Now, what does this have to do with our current situation in Mexico? Well, what I see now are power structures coming up in the country, and criminal groups organizing themselves, making federations out of their organizations. One group turning into three, fracturings. You see this specifically with the Sinaloa cartel up in the north part of the country, and then you see a militarized, giant, fast-growing, almost. You would almost think they're funded by a foreign entity, or a foreign government, which I think is the case in a way, with the New Generation cartel, who is, basically engaged right now in trench warfare in parts of Michoacan with the federal government, who have allied themselves with a bunch of smaller cartels to fight them off. It is an insane, chaotic mess. but you see the Sinaloa cartel on the north, and you see some of the arrests made. You see Operation Fast and the Furious, which armed a very specific cartel on the northern side of the country. You see a lot of these things, and to an observer, it would seem like the United States favors a single cartel in Mexico, which is the Sinaloa cartel. During the COVID epidemic, one cartel grew exponentially, and that was the New Generation cartel. And the reason that happened is because they have access to the Pacific side seaports. That means that, even during COVID, those weren't shut down as far as their supply line to China, which makes people wonder if China is not supporting that cartel in a way. So if you step back from the whole mess of Mexico right now, it seems like there's a proxy war happening within it. Foreign influences pushing and moving things around to gain traction and or influence with the local government. Cartels being financed through material means and even weaponry by foreign entities, including the United States. And finally, a giant drug habit that the United States has. And Mexico basically being the field that where some of that drug habit is, where some of those drugs are grown, or the road where some of these drugs cross into the United States. It's a mess. It is a mess.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment. A few years ago, when I was still teaching at the Tec de Monterrey, that's the Monterrey Institute of Technology here in Mexico, with students, I got on the line. We interviewed Jefferson Morley, who declassified the documents that showed those three Mexican presidents were paid CIA agents with the code names Lithium. And so, yeah, the way we have all of this backstory, and you were touching on exactly what I try to get to with this podcast. The big picture, what's really going on, and myself as an American and student of American empire, I've always been most intrigued by the links between intelligence agencies such as the CIA to the drug cartels. We know the British Empire, the story centuries ago of the British Empire trafficking opium, and then the French and the Americans picking that up in South Asia during Vietnam. Alfred McCoy has written about that. And then in more recent history, we've had people like Gary Webb reveal, the CIA cocaine trafficking links in Mexico and Central America. But now, as you say, it seems like it's become this. I think for me, one of the bigger stories was what you tipped on. China, this proxy war, China coming in. Could you talk a little bit more about that? It's kind of like a reverse opium war, where now the Chinese people say they haven't forgotten their century of humiliation, and so we see China is rising. The U.S. Would you agree? The U.S. American empire is declining. I mean, what are your thoughts there?
I think the U.S. is declining as far as influence. I think there have been many hits to its decline, but specifically, I specifically can trace back some of its recent decline, and as far as its specifically in Mexico, as far as sentiment towards the United States, I think it had kind of started with Trump. It's been going on forever, but Trump really kind of like nailed the lid on the coffin with some of the rhetoric he had coming into the elections, and then when he was elected. I think one of the things he did was coax a lot of these U.S. companies to get out of Mexico and come back to the United States as a punishment for Mexico in a way, because, he made Mexico the villain in his politics, which led to Chinese companies basically immediately moving in, it didn't affect Mexico how you thought, I guess. Then it became apparent that Mexico had a giant deposit of lithium underneath its soil. Lithium that became came to the headlines right after the Mormon massacre happened in the area where some of these deposits have been discovered, which kind of leads me to believe that there's something, there's a link maybe to that as well, as far as cartels in that area wanting to hold and control influence. It's not a place where they can grow anything, and it's not a place where it's not a drug route, but there's a lot of cartel activity right now in parts of Sonora, specifically fighting going on for control of the region. I think a lot of what we're seeing right now is a decline in not only the U.S.'s influence in Mexico, but also the sentiment in Mexico and sentiment in high level politics, and also just civilian populace, as far as viewing the United States as anything other than interventionist and bad. And with China, they see something else. China has been doing shitty stuff in Mexico for years. So some of the some of you might have seen the Netflix series about the autodefensas, the self-defense forces that basically came up out of places like Michoacan to supposedly fight off cartels, but realistically, all of them were cartels. One thing that doesn't get talked about a lot during that time is that China was illegally mining iron ore out of that region. And a lot of that conflict was basically a front to cover up some of that. There were some of those groups that were called out to defense that were actually protecting some of these mining operations in that region. Now, as far as where what I think is happening, I mean, it's I think the United States is involved, obviously, in a military conflict with China for control and influence. But I think the offensive nature of what China is doing by proxy with a place like Mexico is outside of the scope of how the United States is accustomed to or even knows of how to conduct war. And I think China's showing us a new playbook in that respect.
Yeah, this is fascinating. And I saw on Twitter recently you made that interesting comment. And my past guest, Osvaldo Zavala, said the same thing about the lithium and the narcos and the U.S. interests and corporate interests. You said on Twitter that you think that the U.S. will choose to intervene in Mexico, not because of drugs, cartel violence, or even immigration, but the lithium, as Mexico's leftist federal government moves towards nationalizing energy, and tensions are rising. And there's also been talk, in general, this militarization of the U.S., the militarization of Mexico, and then wanting to declare drug cartels as terrorists, which would then give, the legal pretext for the U.S. to intervene in Mexico and expand military operations. What are your thoughts about the future of the, let's say, regional security apparatus? And, would the U.S., what are your thoughts of them declaring cartels terrorists, as well as your comment about them coming in because of the lithium?
Yeah, I don't think they're ever going to declare them, a terrorist organization. And that alone should tell you a lot about, current U.S. politics and where their head is at, So, I am not a scholar on these subjects, but I will say that I know enough about I know enough about the definition of a terrorist organization to know that cartels not only meet that definition, they also add new elements to it that haven't been considered in the past. They're their own new form of it, basically. They do they have political motivations? Of course they do. They're involved in not only having their own political candidates sponsored by drug money, but they also assassinate rival candidates of the other cartels that also want to run for office. They kill reporters that talk about some of these things. They assassinate reporters. We had 2 high-level assassinations recently in Tijuana. They use terror through execution video, hanging people on bridges, you name it, they do it. They've employed fourth generational warfare tactics that have rewritten the playbook of how you utilize, civilian drones in warfare. Syria came up with the first ones, and I think Mexican cartels were the first one that actually did chemical weapons on them. And some of their methodology are being exported right now to the Ukraine. It's pretty interesting and fascinating if you kind of look at it that way. But basically, what I see is they need a redefinition of a terrorist organization. The only reason why they're not going to be declared as such is because every single Mexican in the United States right now that is there illegally or it wants to cross there illegally will now have the grounds to ask for political asylum. because they are now fleeing from a terrorist organization that has been created by the need and hunger of the United States for drugs. That's the only reason why they will never be declared a terrorist organization. And that should show you something about the ethics of the United States right now, because, they're taking in Ukrainians, but not Mexicans. It is an interesting conflict of the soul that the United States should kind of look into.
Yeah, and I'm not a big fan. Listeners know U.S. foreign policy, NATO, interventionism, and all of that stuff. And for me, I would also view them, that would be part of their interests. If they labeled cartels terrorists, then they could just further advance their expansion and militarization. But after living here for many years, I would agree with you that definitely what's going on with the cartels here is terrorism. It's on par or even worse in comparison to terrorism that we've seen in other parts of the world. So I would definitely agree with you there. Maybe if we forget about China for a second and the U.S. empire and just kind of like focus on Mexico and the narco situation here, if you could tell us who's really in charge. I mean, is it basically the cartels, the Mexican cartels in charge? Are they the ones running the show? Have China and the U.S. empire, has their influence decreased? And as well, the situation just seems to be getting much worse. Like it's almost hopeless. You were touching on it. It seems like they're gaining ground, they're gaining territory, pueblos, cities, states, politicians. In recent elections, like all of the politicians, and I forget which states, were basically in the hands of the narcos, because if you were not, you'd be taken out. So basically, if you're a politician in that entire state, you have to be, the narcos are behind you. And so, what are your thoughts on that situation within Mexico?
This is the current president of Mexico's policy against cartels is hugs, not bullets, right? So that should tell you a lot about his policy. Then he reversed that and he said, well, I'm going to do something completely different. And for people that have a point of reference, Mexico's drug war kind of symbolically started with a far-right presidency, which I worked under, run by a man called Felipe Calderon, who was responsible for basically militarizing the drug war. Right, he was the first man to kind of take the military out into the streets and basically have them kind of confront some of these problems, because the police forces were corrupted and were not equipped to do so, which led to some successes, but a lot of failures and a lot of massacres that shouldn't have happened and a lot of horrible stuff. But one thing he did was create a new federal police force and uniform them. He put military into the leadership of these police forces, which I think is a very big mistake that has happened over and over in Mexico. But that's another subject. He did all that. So now comes in his main enemy and political rival his main enemy. Even in that election, he ran against him and almost beat him. Who is completely to the left, open Chavista, open pro-Maduro guy, very, very to the left, nationalist guy. He's been tearing down statues of Spanish conquistadors left and right, that type of guy, which is fine, Now you see this guy saying, well, I'm going to do everything completely different. And one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new police force. So basically doing the same thing that Felipe Calderon did. He made the Guardia Nacional. And he put military in it. Guardia Nacional is basically just military members dressed in that camouflage uniform. And they're doing exactly the same thing that they used to do. Patrol in a truck on the ground, providing presence for the local populace for them to feel safe, which means absolutely nothing to the drug problem and the cartel problem, the violence problem. There's a bunch of them in Tijuana that's standing on corners, not doing anything. They are completely useless in what their function is supposed to be. And he's basically doing everything that his main enemy and rival and predecessor did, and nothing's happening. Actually, we are living through one of the most violent presidencies in history to be a Mexican. the amount of people disappearing and the amount of death is beyond anything Felipe Calderon ever did. And it's just getting worse. One thing people need to realize and know is that the United States, in a way, has been paying for that drug war since it started through things like Plan Merida, the bilateral agreements to basically outsource the drug war into Mexico. So some of my training and some of my equipment and some of my salaries were paid by U.S. tax dollars. Now, I don't see the U.S. auditing, in Mexico. I see exactly the same methodology being put forth by Mexican military and police to try and fight off the cartels. When I started back in 2004, it is the same thing now, and it is getting worse, and nobody's changing it. And I think a big part of it is because it's mostly a monopoly of military, ex-military, and current military members running things at a high level who have basically, now they're comfortable. If people want to know what the true power in Mexico is, it's not in politics, it's not in money, it is in the military. The military is who runs policy at a deep level and at a long-term level in Mexico. They don't get elected out of power. They don't get moved out of positions of power. They are people that were born into it in a lot of ways. And depending on where what part of the military you're talking about, you can't be a general if your dad wasn't a general. In some places, I'm not. People are going to probably call out BS on that, but people that are in the know will realize this is true. It is a quasi mafia, and you see all these power structures that are basically just sitting it out and not doing anything to push the country forward is what I see.
Yeah, you mentioned Calderon and AMLO, and in general, I feel it's the case in most countries that there's little difference between presidents. In this case, Mexican presidents, and they serve different interests. Whether it previously was CIA as a CIA asset or corporate interests, or as you were detailing now. What would be your thoughts then? Life after AMLO and trying to at least begin to try to solve this problem, because I see the same thing as you. Things are just getting worse. I haven't had any major experiences, but all around me, I've had coworkers kidnapped. I've had my home broken into 3 times, and then you hear stories from other people. So the death is around you. How would we begin? What your thoughts on life after AMLO and how to begin to solve this problem?
Number one, I think we're going to go into there is no, I don't see any clear political rival to AMLO right now in Mexico. The last elections were almost tidal wave victory. And that is a sign of, I don't know, people will say it's a sign of people having a lot of faith in the president. I think it's a sign of people giving up on politics, which is a bad thing. They don't see any change happening. And people are just going to get, I could see people are kind of giving up basically on it, which is exactly what, politicians at a high level might want. Nobody showing up to vote. But I think we're about to head into another version of AMLO taking the presidency. That's what I see, which is going to lead to more tensions with the United States. I see a clear push to nationalize lithium, along with a few other reforms to the energy bill that they want to put forth, trying to make Mexico energy independent, which is a good thing for the country. Don't get me wrong, I'm all about that. But that will lead into interventionism. That's clear. It's happened before in a lot of ways. I think we're in for some dark. I know a lot of us are detached from some of the violence. It's hard for me, who is somebody who worked in Tijuana, to explain some of these things to somebody from that lives in an upper middle class neighborhood somewhere in Mexico City. They have experienced violence, but not at they haven't experienced finding a guy that gets rid of almost thousands of bodies through caustic soda, almost at an industrial level. They haven't witnessed a movie level shootout inside of a hospital during broad daylight, where where civilians are just strewn about. Violence happens in Mexico in pockets and in different places, and in a way, it basically isolates some segments of the population into seeing, well, it's not that bad. It might not be that bad for you, but it is bad for other people. I've walked with mothers looking for the remains of their kids that have been missing for 20 years in fucking vacant lots, probing the ground with sticks. Now that should be in the front page of every newspaper. But now what we're listening to is Ukraine. Support Ukraine. Mexicans having the Ukrainian flag over their Facebook profile like it means anything. Meanwhile, during the first 72 hours of that conflict, we outperformed the Ukraine as far as reported death. Think about that. Mexico outperformed a war zone during the first 72 hours. Yeah, I don't think nothing is going to change in Mexico unless the local populace wakes up. I don't have any faith in the military as far as as far as a force for change in Mexico. That I'm not just so don't get me wrong. I don't think all of the military is corrupted, but certain factions and certain parts of the military are just set in their ways. They are not a policing force. I policed with members of the military in Mexico. It's not a good idea to have them in that role. I went through a career path. I learned about laws. I learned about arresting procedures. I learned about human rights. I had to interview people. I had to talk to people. The military doesn't go through any of these things. And once they were taken out of their positions of basically being on the sidelines into actually being in the fray in the drug war, that they don't want to give that power up. That's what you're seeing as well. They are holding on to the power that was given to them under Calderon, and they don't want to go. They don't want to go back into the cartels. They are in charge of massive building operations of airports and train lines across the country right now. Getting contracts that are worth millions of dollars. And this is the Army. This is the Navy. Again, I don't see in them a clear effort and or push to change things in Mexico. So all I have right now, as far as faith, is in the populace itself.
Yeah, I was just going to add about the Ukraine comment, like people putting up the Ukraine flags as well. Like, for example, Yemen has been being bombed by the Saudis with British, European, and American backing, and no one's been putting up a Yemen flag for the last few years. So yeah, there's a lot of that stuff, a lot of problems we have here at home in Mexico. And this leads me to another question, maybe to touch on the U.S. as well, because you've talked about the security situation in the U.S. I think broadly, a lot of us are seeing across the world, across the board, a collapsing economy, increased wars all over the world, increasing social unrest, political revolutions, especially recently we've been seeing in Africa. And I believe this is also going to lead to increased crime, not just in Mexico, but in many countries. I'm starting to get that sense that in the U.S. we're seeing increased crime. What are your thoughts there in the U.S.?
I travel across the United States. I'm in a different state every week, basically. I think I've seen more of the United States than most Americans, which is a surreal thing to kind of say because I'm probably 3 or 4 years into my American dream, but I've seen more of it than most Americans. And I've seen California, and I've seen Detroit, I've seen Chicago, and I've seen Seattle, I've seen some of the parts of it that are, oblivious and or programmed to think that not here, places like Texas. Texas talks a big game about who they are and what they're not about and stuff like that. But Texas is going the way of California pretty soon, in my opinion. So you see a weird shift in the United States. and the clear division. Everybody's either, Democrat or Republican. Most people don't realize this, but most Mexicans are very conservative in their politics. Most Mexicans, at least the ones from my generation, are. Why? We grew up Catholic. We grew up under, family nucleus is still intact. But we were made the enemy by the last president that the United States had. We were made the bad guys. We were made the antagonists. I think that was a shot in the foot, not only for that presidency, but also for the country as a whole. The wall on that board, the wall that they built, the fence that they built, is a joke. People calling for the border to be closed down are completely ignorant and oblivious about the fact that we both depend on each other in a ginormous way. The United States is dependent on Mexican consumers. We are the second largest consumer of American products there is. Also, every single kitchen I've visited in the United States that is of any quality has Mexicans working in it, and I'm willing to bet that not all of them are there legally. During the COVID epidemic, we had produce in the aisles. You didn't have any toilet paper, but you had produce and some market stock goods there that were picked by illegal immigrants. Think about that. During COVID, we had essential workers in the form of illegal immigrants. If you take out every illegal immigrant out of the country and send them back to where they're from, as some Americans like screaming, the country would collapse immediately. I think it's about time the United States wakes up to that fact and to realize it has a dependency on the young country of Mexico. When I say young, Mexico has a giant resource that the United States doesn't have. A working class that is young, that is willing to work. A lot of people want to talk about oil and lithium. Mexico has strong, young, working people that are willing to work. The United States does not have a lot of that. Yeah, we need each other more than we even think and imagine. But politics has divided us and vilified certain aspects of the culture on both sides. I think, main thing I'm realizing just by being on both sides of the border is how we really need each other. Border Patrol, most of the Border Patrol agents that I've trained, because I've trained Border Patrol and Homeland Security agents, which is surreal for me as an immigrant, but I have. I've trained Border Patrol, BORTAC guys, border trackers on basically the latest and greatest of cartel methodologies. And you see in them, there's a bunch of Latinos in those groups, And it's funny because they get labeled the most racist federal organization out there, and most of these guys are Latino, like first generation. So they get vilified too, but they're doing a job. Then you go and to see some of these protest lines, and they're, throwing rocks at customs and immigration, and sending supplies down and donations down to some migrant camps in Tijuana, for example. And those donations are being sold in open air markets all over Tijuana to make money for people that don't even give that money back to the people that stuff was for, and they use it to fund more people being brought up from South America to then be crossed by people smugglers across the border. So these virtue signaling people trying to stick it to the man by sending donations out to that migrant camp are actually funding people smuggling, and that is clear to anybody that cares to look at it. And basically, I think the U.S. as a whole has a big conflict in the soul, and Mexico as well. We need each other more than we think.
Yeah, I would totally agree, and I always stress nuance on the podcast. And I don't really like to play the left-right game. I kind of step outside it, and I think people need to live, visit both countries. And I remember my first job when I was 15. Legally, you're allowed to work in. I'm from Chicago, and so I got a job at a supermarket. Happy Foods doesn't exist anymore, but we had mostly migrants, Irish, Italian, Puerto Rican, but the biggest portion of the workforce were Mexicans, and I had a great time with them. Hard workers. Probably some of them were not legal. I have no idea. But in any case, and it goes to what you're saying, that in Mexico, there's a lot of people willing to work, even if the wage is not that high. And I just don't see that in the U.S. and with the youth. And as you said, I totally agree. The U.S. would collapse if Mexicans were pulled out.
Don't get me wrong. Like, when it comes to politics, like, people assume things about me sometimes when they see what I talk about. I want to smoke a joint at my gay best friend's wedding and have a gun on me and just be left alone. Those are my politics. I think most Mexicans would kind of agree on some of these politics. As long as it doesn't concern me, it's fine. But there's a militancy out there. They're trying to make it about us versus them, which is pretty interesting to kind of see. I mean, I am a permanent resident of the United States. I'm not a citizen yet. I'm working towards that. I can't vote. I can pay taxes though, and that's pretty painful. But I could see some of the elements, and just everybody wants to have a side. Mexico doesn't get a lot of things right, but at least we've had several political parties in power over the past few decades. There has been a change of power, at least in that way. We have a federal voting card, and nobody thinks it's racist, across the board. But it's interesting to see that identity politic thing in the United States, and how it's almost like a blanket that people cover themselves in.
And speaking of identity, this leads me to my next question. And I over the last 2 years, because of what's going on with the pandemic, I've been getting emails, calls from people from all parts of the world looking to flee to Mexico. I've met some of the listeners who even came down and have purchased property here in Mexico and in different parts of Mexico. And so and I've thought about this all my life. Someone kind of like yourself as a nomad. I've lived in half a dozen countries, and I've moved around the U.S. and back and forth to Croatia and everywhere else. And I'm an American who left for Mexico. Many Mexicans, such as yourself, leave for America. Many Mexicans prefer staying in Mexico. And sometimes I even think about going back to the U.S. And I think you left Mexico for the U.S., and it seems people from all walks find happiness in both worlds. It's a very personal life decision. In some ways, there's a higher quality of life in Mexico where things are kind of like slowed down. And in the U.S., of course, there are better wages and a very comfortable material lifestyle. What are your just kind of general thoughts on expatriation, and would you ever come back to live in Mexico, for example?
Yeah, I mean, I think most immigrants that have had to leave Mexico I had to leave Mexico because it was unsustainable for me as far as the job I did, and then having to leave that job without any sort of protection and any sort of backup. So I had to leave. I do long for a life where I can live down there, and I think most immigrants do. I mean, most of the ones that I've talked to are wanting to make their money, get old, build a house back where they were born, and just move back down. That's a beautiful dream to have. But then you see this new phenomenon of cross migration, Americans being economic refugees of the United States and moving to places like Tulum or Tijuana is a perfect example of this. There's a positive side to it, of course. Living in Tulum or living in Tijuana might be in some ways the quality of living is going to be very different depending on how much you earn. San Diego too is a nickname that they're calling Tijuana now. Marijuana trafficking is happening from San Diego into Mexico mostly. Think about that, the phenomenon of that. One thing one negative aspect of that is that they're bringing their drug habits with them, Americans. And you're noticing an explosion of violence in some of the places where Americans have now set up communities, who are now basically creating drug markets that are viable to fight for locally. That's why you're seeing these new surges of violence in places where there's expat communities kind of being built up. Again, I think we're going to come to a point where that border is not going to matter anymore for a lot of us. We're already linked up in different ways by marriage, blood. There's a recent, Idle Mexico commercial that they made where they were going to give discounts to Americans who had a percent, depending on how much percentage of Mexican blood you have, they would give you a discount. Of course, they went to Texas and interviewed a bunch of people that were really not pro-Mexico. And they found out they had a lot of Mexican DNA, and they gave them big discounts on flights to Mexico. That was pretty funny to see. I don't know. It's an interesting question. I've seen both the Mexification of parts of the United States, with communities moving up there and setting up churches. I was recently I recently went to Arizona. I was invited to a Santa Muerte festival in Arizona. Now, people don't know what Santa Muerte is, or if they only know Santa Muerte from what they see on TikTok or Instagram, or what they saw on a stupid American movie that vilified or just destroyed the imagery and the iconography of that faith. It would seem like a scary thing. But to anybody that actually grew up with that faith in their life, they'll see it's a festival. It's a veneration of a duality goddess. It's a veneration of flowers and death. I've seen festivals like that with music and food that I've only seen in places like Mexico City or Tijuana. Now they're in Arizona. And it's a familiar thing to people there now. So you're seeing it on both sides of the border. Basically, in a way, I think we're bleeding into each other. Both countries are and have been for years, through immigration, illegal and legal, through immigration. And when I say illegal and illegal, I mean on both sides. Americans have illegally migrated to Mexico. They don't do things as they should do them. They don't pay certain things. They don't come up with certain permits and things that they have to. They set up irregular commerce in Mexico. That's something that not a lot of people talk about, but it's true. A lot of people want to talk about illegal immigration and they immediately think about, Mexicans, but United States and Americans do that in Mexico too. I think it's going to be, there has to be a change at a social level, community level, and we have to figure out and come to terms with the fact that, both our countries depend on each other in a big way, and we're going to need each other for the coming, global shift that is apparently happening as far as power structures going on.
Yeah. And you want to get your thoughts on that. Yeah, just to comment as well. It's funny how the tables have turned, and the Mexican government is now cracking down on illegal foreigners. I saw on your Patreon, so people can check out your Patreon as well to get a lot of exclusive stuff there. People know that my Patreon was terminated a year ago after an article was published by the Associated Press, co-written by Atlantic Council, NATO's think tank. So I'm in the crosshairs of some people. But Ukraine, what are your thoughts on what's going on with Ukraine and this? I tell people that what we're living through only happens once a century or every few centuries, this shifting of the world order. So, what are your thoughts on Ukraine?
Yeah. It's clear to, if you care to look at it as a conflict, again, I'm not a scholar. I was a agent of the government in Mexico, and I did a lot of things, and I learned a lot of things, and I had exposure to some amazing teachers, and all of them were war fighters and people that had experience, and I got to see conflict very closely. I see a president in the Ukraine who is a puppet president. That's what I see. I see a president who was a former actor, and who is still acting. I see a lot of propaganda coming out of the presidency. I see a lot of videos that are completely debunked later on. I see factions within their military who are open Nazis. We're open Nazi sympathizers fighting against the Russian invasion. I see the local populace being basically kept there hostage. There's a lot of things that I see. Now, don't get me wrong. I've posted up a lot of videos myself on my social media about some of the Ukrainian forces fighting back. But people misunderstand that the fact that I'm posting those means that I support the president of Ukraine or the politics behind it. I'm venerating the aspect of locals taking up arms against an invader. I think most Mexicans could appreciate that a lot. I'm taking up. I'm paying homage to women filling wine bottles with styrofoam and gasoline. People coming up with catapults to throw Molotov cocktails at tanks. That's what I'm kind of like paying homage to when I post some of these things, because I think, there was a metal band when I was growing up called Rage Against the Machine, and one of the guitar players had a "Arm the Homeless" on his guitar written, and that stuck with me my whole life. I believe that the ability to have the means to defend yourself and your family should be an internationally protected human right. And if those means are an AK-47 or a grenade launcher, I think so be it. As long as it's regulated and as long as you train with it, I think it should be something allowed. It's fascinating to me that Americans that are openly saying disarm, don't buy guns, make them illegal, are now saying let's ship guns out to these people so they can defend themselves from an invading force. I see Russia as I think, I don't know, you might know more about this, but I think the GDP is probably really close to that of Mexico. It's not, Russia isn't what a lot of people think it is. It's not, it is a military power. But you can see a lot of their supplies and the tanks and the artillery they're using is mostly stuff from the 60s. There's out-of-date MREs being utilized by some of these forces. There are people going into some of these conflict zones that are basically being drafted or pushed into this conflict that don't want to be there, and they're giving up and abandoning military equipment left and right. I think what you're seeing with Russia is that they are surrounding any city that they see is being is holding out or resisting, and they're just going to be wait. They're encircling some of these places. They want to capture the Ukraine complete. That's why they didn't. They're not. That's why you still have internet access there. That's why you still have. Roads in a lot of places. I know some people have taken out some bridges, but Russia's plan is to capture the country, cut off the head of it, put their own head there, and leave that country with a military now under leadership of that of their choosing, of their leadership of their choosing. That's why you don't see a lot of at least that's what I'm seeing myself. I think they want to capture the military as well. The Russians do. I mean, it is an interesting conflict, and right now I'm paying close attention to a lot of these foreign fighters going in there from the West and some of their experiences. And I know 5 of them that went there, one in contact with, and some of the stories that they've been sharing with me about what they're seeing it's pretty insane. The complete lack of organization on the Ukrainian side, how some of them are being mistreated because of the color of their skin by some of these Ukrainian forces who they're there to fight with, stuff like that. Which I think history will tell us some of these stories later on. But that conflict is a pretty interesting one, and yes, and my heart goes out to the people that are stuck in the middle of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a lot's going on. I guess one of my last then questions would be, and it applies to anyone, anywhere, whether you are in Ukraine, the US, or here in Mexico. As I said before, a lot of craziness is happening globally. Things are breaking down. A new world order is upon us. We don't know exactly what that's going to look like, but there are, just some tips, general themes for you on what people should be thinking about in order to protect themselves and their families. There are people looking to move away from urban areas to rural areas. If you have to live in the city, I'm sure that within the metropolitan area, there are safer and smarter places to reside. And for example, you do a course on urban movement, which I think is applicable to all people. And so what would just be, a few smart things that you'd advise people to do in general, to stay out of harm's way?
Oh, God. I mean, if you don't know about electricity or how to electrify a house or how to fix electricity or plumbing, start now. If you don't know how to be a mechanic or how to do mechanic, how to fix change an oil filter on your car. We live in a day and age where you can learn through YouTube to basically become self-sufficient in just the basics. What you're seeing in the Ukraine is a warning for the world as far as what we need to know before something like that happens. You're starting to see it now. Supply chain broken down, manual labor and specialized labor being hard to find. People are going back to basics. And this is Ukraine. Some of these people are still in contact with some of their agrarian backgrounds, but not other parts of the world. We're completely detached from that. I think one big thing I will tell people is to get back to basics, not just for them, but for their kids. Good times produce weak men. Weak men produce hard times. Hard times produce strong men. I think we're in one of those shifts right now, and we need to start producing stronger children for what's coming. Seeing some of the conflict in the Ukraine, a lot of commenters were like, "Hey, Ed, all of these people look like they took your urban movement class." I said, "Well, all of this stuff that I show comes from a place where there's an active war that nobody acknowledges, which is Mexico. Those are the lessons that I got from this conflict." And if you're seeing them applied by somewhere out there, like in the Ukraine, it's because they're getting back to basics. Mexico, that's what Mexico does, basics. So again, invest in equipment for your house that can make you self-sufficient. Invest in training. Not being allowed to and not being able to are two completely different things. I'll leave it at that as far as weaponry. The responsibility to defend yourself and your family will fall to you when everything else falls away. In a lot of parts of Mexico, that's already happened. That's why you have these, the defense forces that showed up, and all that's why you have these communities that are arming themselves. There's nothing wrong or evil about a gun. It's who's behind it. And as long as you can figure out a way to kind of infuse that into your lifestyle, be it through hunting illegally, a hunting rifle can be utilized for a lot of other things, if in the right hands. So again, I think it's about taking responsibility for your own safety and that of your family, taking responsibility for their upkeep of your home, of your car, of your food sources, and to figure some of that out for yourself. And also, finally, community. We need to get back to community. We've been fucking separated for a long time now with our cell phones, Facebook, and all of these other things kind of distracting us from that. If one thing I really advise people to is to find the others, as Timothy Leary used to say. Find people on the same path as you are as far as preparation and figuring some of these things out. And there's strength in numbers. What you're seeing in the Ukraine are groups of people that have found that out after the fact. Probably a good idea to find that out now.
Yeah, all great advice and things that I myself have begun working towards as well. Where would be the best place for people to follow your work? And I know you're on Patreon, you've got in-person courses, you've got online Zoom webinars as well. What are some things people can look for and where to go to find you?
The best place to find me is www.edsmanifesto.com. Altogether, edsmanifesto.com. I am shadow banned on Instagram, shadow banned I think on Facebook as well, and my Patreon is I'm going to try and keep it, but some of the stuff that I show and expose is scary to a lot of people that don't know the necessity behind it. I have a Telegram group as well, Ed Manifesto, the Green Room, which is where I post a lot of the stuff that I can't post anywhere else. And if people want to follow the news from Mexico, we have a sister page on Instagram called Demoler_. Again, they're shadow banned too, but it's a pretty beautiful, interesting news source coming out of Mexico in English for people that want to follow it.
Yeah. All right. I will include all of the links in the description. So wherever people are watching or listening, you can find those links. I've subscribed to your newsletter to stay up to date. Because I don't use social media much like Instagram or Facebook, I was bummed that I missed being informed about your in-person class that you gave here in Mexico, where I am, late last year at a Krav Maga institute that I briefly attended many years ago. So maybe I'll catch you next time when you pass through. Stay frosty, Senor Calderon, and thank you for being on Geopolitics and Empire.
Thank you for the invitation.
I hope you enjoyed this Geopolitics and Empire podcast. The website is geopoliticsandempire.com, and I encourage you to sign up for the free email list that goes out with each podcast and every weekend with a collection of news headlines. The newsletter and website are our last lines of defense. We're being censored and deplatformed. It's nearly impossible to find Geopolitics and Empire on the Google search engine. We've been blacklisted. YouTube frequently takes down our videos with strikes. Facebook restricts our page. Reddit and Twitter take down posts. And after the Associated Press mentioned Geopolitics and Empire in a 2021 article co-written with NATO, our Patreon account was terminated. Vimeo also terminated our Pro account. The best free way to help Geopolitics and Empire is to leave a review on Apple Podcasts or elsewhere and subscribe to all of our media channels. You can find the video broadcast now on 5 platforms: Odyssey, Rockfin, Rumble, BitChute, and Brighteon. You can find the audio broadcast on the podcast ecosystem: SoundCloud, Apple, Spotify, and so on. My current favorite social media channels are Twitter and Telegram, but you can also find us on Gab, MeWe, Minds, Float, VK, Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Finally, Geopolitics and Empire is in dire need of funding to continue. You can leave a donation, purchase a consultation with the host, or become a member to receive additional benefits. We also produce a weekly broadcast called Dissident Thinker for members and Rockfin subscribers only. We will continue to fight the good fight come hell or high water. Thank you for listening.